The ground had been cracking all morning, but nobody told the children Sorith 4 was a dying world. Its surface was nothing but floating stone platforms suspended over a miles-deep pit of boiling magma called the maw. The platforms shifted and groaned like old bones. Every few hours, another chunk would break off and tumble into the red glow below. The Galactic Relief Corps had sent a convoy to pull the last Sorati colonists off the planet before it tore itself apart completely. Danny Harlo was not a soldier. He was not a scientist or a diplomat or anyone important. He was a cargo loader. He carried boxes from one place to another. He had thick hands, a quiet voice, and a bad knee from a rescue operation back on Earth that had gone sideways 3 years ago. He had signed up for convoy work because it paid well and kept him moving. That was the full story of Danny Harlo. The evacuation was messy. The Sorati were a scaled, winged species, small and light with hollow bones built for gliding on thermal currents. But the heat pouring from the maw had grown too intense. Their wings locked up in temperatures above a certain point, turning their greatest gift into dead weight on their backs. So they shuffled on foot toward the landing pads, carrying what little they could, while human and alien workers loaded shuttles as fast as possible. Danny was hauling a crate of medical supplies across the main platform when the big tremor hit. It was not like the small ones. This one came from deep below, and it split the platform like a sheet of glass hit with a hammer. A crack raced across the stone, 2 meters wide, jagged and sudden. People screamed. Workers grabbed for anything solid. Danny dropped his crate and braced himself against a shuttle strut. And then he heard a different sound. A small sound. A child screaming. He looked toward the crack. A tiny Sorati girl had fallen through. She was hanging from a rock ledge about 20 meters below the surface, her small claws digging into stone that was already crumbling under her grip. Her wings were locked flat against her back from the heat. She could not fly. She could not climb. She was 4 years old, and she was going to fall into a river of molten rock. The Sorati adults rushed to the edge and looked down. They reached out their arms. They called to her, but none of them jumped. They could not. The heat below would kill them faster than it would kill the child. Their hollow bones would shatter on impact. Their biology made rescue impossible. Danny did not think about biology. He did not think about the heat or the depth or the fact that he was not wearing any protective gear. He grabbed a cargo strap from the nearest crate, wrapped it twice around his left forearm, and jumped as he hit the rock face hard. His boots scraped against the cliff wall as he slid downward, the cargo strap catching on a jutting stone and snapping tight around his arm. Pain shot through his shoulder. He swung sideways, reached out with his free hand, and caught the girl just as her claws slipped from the ledge. She weighed almost nothing. Her body was trembling so hard he could feel her bones vibrating against his palm. She screamed directly into his ear, and he held her tighter. Below them, the maw churned. Waves of heat rolled upward like the breath of something enormous. Danny could feel his skin blistering. The cargo strap was cutting into his forearm, and the stone it was hooked on was starting to crack. He pulled a piton from his belt, a simple metal spike he used for anchoring heavy cargo, and slammed it into the cliff wall with his fist. Once, twice, 3 times before it held. He hooked the strap through the piton's eye and let it take their weight. They hung there. 20 meters below the surface, maybe 300 meters above liquid fire. Danny pressed the child against his chest and curled his body around her to shield her from the heat point 11 minutes. That was how long it took for the rescue team to lower a cable and pull them up. 11 minutes of hanging in a furnace, breathing air so hot it hurt to swallow, feeling his hands burn and blister and burn some more. When they reached the surface, the medical team rushed forward. The Sorati girl's mother was there, a woman named Davri, and she was making a sound that needed no translation. Danny tried to hand the child over, but the girl would not let go. Her small claws were locked into his shirt, and she had pressed her face into his neck, and she would not release him. Danny sat on the ground with the child in his arms while a medic wrapped his hands in burn gel. His fingers were raw. His forearm was torn from the strap. He could barely feel anything below his elbows. Someone asked him why he jumped. He did not understand the question. The evacuation continued around them. Shuttles lifted off. Platforms cracked and fell. The planet kept dying. And Danny Harlo sat in the dust with a tiny alien girl curled against his chest because she was scared and he was the thing she had decided was safe. Far below, in the deepest chamber of the maw, something opened its eyes. 2 points of golden light, ancient and vast, flickering in the dark like the last coals of a fire that had burned for 1,000 years. It had felt the fall. It had felt the catch. It had felt a heartbeat that did not belong to this world, steady and stubborn and completely unwilling to stop. The old fire stirred. And for the first time in 6 centuries, the Maw Guardian turned its gaze upward. Nobody had warned Danny that the nights on Sorith 4 sounded like a sleeping animal breathing. The evacuation was paused. Half the shuttles had lifted off with colonists, but the tremors had damaged 2 landing pads beyond use. Engineers needed a full day to set up temporary pads on the northern shelf, the most stable ground left on the planet. So everyone waited, and Danny lay in the field hospital with his hands wrapped in gel bandages, listening to the low rumble that came up through the rock every few minutes like a giant rolling over in its sleep. Pelly would not leave. That was the girl's name. For years old, barely reaching Danny's knee, covered in soft bronze scales that shifted color when she was scared. Right now they were pale gold, which Davri said meant she felt safe. She sat on the edge of Danny's cot with her tail curled around his wrist, and every time a medic tried to move her, she hissed. Davri stood nearby, watching. She was grateful. Danny could see that. But there was something else in her expression, something closer to dread. Among our people, Davri said quietly, the Maw is not just a place. It is alive. It watches. Those who enter it do not return the same. Danny flexed his bandaged fingers and winced. I returned, just a little crispy. Davri did not smile. You entered the breath of the Maw and lived. That has not happened in 600 years. The last one who did, we called Firesworn. Danny had no idea what that meant, and he was too tired to ask. He closed his eyes. Pelly pressed her small body against his side and fell asleep with her ear over his heartbeat. He woke to the sound of the world splitting open. It was not a tremor. It was something deeper, something deliberate, like a fist pressing upward from below. The floor of the hospital cracked in a clean line, and from the crack rose a heat so intense that the air itself seemed to turn solid. Danny could see it, shimmering and bending, like looking through melted glass. Then the presence hit him. It was not a voice. There were no words. It was a weight inside his skull, old and enormous, pressing gently against his thoughts the way a hand might press against a window. It showed him things, images, feelings, memories that were not his own, a world that was young and green, a creature of fire coiling around its heart to protect it, a darkness that came from between the stars, burrowing deep, feeding on heat. The creature wrapping itself around the darkness to hold it still. Centuries passing, the fire growing weaker, the darkness growing stronger, and then Danny's heartbeat. Steady, stubborn, falling through hot air with a child in his arms. The presence focused on that heartbeat like it was the most important sound in the universe. Pain hit Danny's left hand first. It started in his burned palm, sharper than the original injury, sharper than anything he had ever felt. He looked down and saw light moving under his skin. Gold and red lines traced themselves from his palm up his wrist, branching like roots or rivers or veins of molten metal, climbing his forearm, curling around his elbow, reaching his shoulder. He could not scream. The pain stole his breath. He fell off the cot and hit the floor on his knees, holding his arm out in front of him as the light carved its pattern deeper and deeper into his flesh. Pelly woke up screaming. Davri grabbed her daughter and pulled her back. The medical staff rushed in and then stopped dead. The lines cooled. The light faded from white gold to a deep, permanent red, like the color of coals that have burned all night and still hold their heat at dawn. The pattern covered Danny's entire left arm from fingertip to shoulder. It was beautiful and terrible. It looked like dragon scales made of light, embedded in human skin. Danny knelt on the floor, breathing hard, sweat dripping from his face. His arm felt like it belonged to someone else. It was warm, not painfully hot, but warm, constantly, like holding it near a fire that would never go out. The Sorati medical staff were on their knees, not treating him, kneeling. Their heads were bowed and their wings were spread flat against the floor in what Danny recognized as the deepest form of Sorati respect. Davri was the only one still standing. She held Pelly against her chest and stared at Danny's arm with an expression he could not read. Then she whispered a word in Sorati that Danny's translator earpiece caught it a moment later. The word was firesworn. The room was completely silent. Danny looked at his arm. The marks pulsed gently with his heartbeat, glowing faintly in the dim hospital light. "What does that mean?" he asked. "What does firesworn actually mean?" No one answered. "Davri." He looked at her directly. "The last firesworn. 600 years ago. What happened to them?" Davri's scales had gone white. Pelly was clinging to her mother's neck, staring at Danny with wide amber eyes that held no fear at all, only wonder. "They went into the maw," Davri finally said, "to fight what lives beneath, to hold the darkness so the world could survive. And they did not come back." Danny looked at his glowing arm. He looked at the crack in the floor, still radiating heat. He looked at Pelly, who reached one small hand toward him across the distance between them, her tiny claws opening and closing like she wanted to hold on to him again. Somewhere deep below the planet's surface, the breathing sound grew louder, and the old fire burned just a little brighter because it had finally found what it had been waiting for. 3 days was all it took for the galaxy to find out. Someone on the medical staff had recorded the marking. The footage showed Danny on his knees, golden light carving itself in his arm, Sorati nurses dropping to the floor in reverence. It spread across the galactic network like wildfire. Within hours, Danny Harlo, cargo loader, nobody special, employee number 4471 on a relief convoy roster, was the most talked about human in 12-star systems. Ships started arriving. A research vessel from the Galactic Science Collective. A diplomatic shuttle carrying 3 council observers. A Sorati religious delegation that had traveled 4 days at maximum speed because they believed a living myth was standing on their dying holy world. Danny wanted none of it. His hands were still healing. His left arm glowed faintly at all times, and he had discovered that he could feel heat in ways that made no sense. Not just temperature, direction, depth, meaning. When he placed his palm flat on the ground, he could sense the thermal currents running beneath the planet's surface like rivers. He could feel them all pulsing far below, slow and rhythmic, like a second heartbeat layered under his OW. T terrified him. Pelly did not care about any of the visitors. She followed Danny everywhere, her small feet pattering on the stone behind him, her tail occasionally wrapping around his ankle when she wanted him to stop walking. She had started calling him Don, which her mother explained was the closest Sorati word to his name, but also meant shield. Danny pretended he had not heard that part. The council sent a senior diplomat named Fossick to assess the situation. Fossick was a Drenari, tall, thin, covered in a hard shell the color of wet slate, with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected no warmth whatsoever. He arrived, scanned Danny's arm with 3 different devices, and immediately declared the entire event a probable political manipulation. "The Sorati colony is failing," Fossick said to Danny in a tone usually reserved for explaining simple things to slow children. "A human firesworn brings attention. Attention brings aid. Aid brings survival. You understand the incentive." Danny understood that Fossick was calling him a prop. He shrugged and went back to helping the engineers repair a landing pad. His burned hands ached with every bolt he tightened, but sitting still felt worse. That evening, the tremors grew stronger. 2 in 1 hour, each one shaking dust from the ceiling of the temporary shelters. The Sorati religious delegation prayed. Fossick filed a report. Danny sat outside alone, watching the orange glow from the maw pulse against the underside of the clouds. Pelly found him there. She climbed into his lap without asking and leaned against his chest. Her scales were shifting between bronze and pale gold, which meant she was trying to feel safe, but not quite managing it. "Dawn," she said quietly. "The ground is angry." "Yeah," Danny said. "It is. Can you make it stop?" He did not answer, because he did not know how to explain to a 4-year-old that he was just a man who carried boxes. The worst tremor hit at midnight. It was not a shake. It was a heave, like the entire planet had lurched sideways. 3 shelter walls collapsed. A section of a northern shelf cracked and slid 2 meters toward the maw. Alarm screamed. People ran. Danny fell to his knees, and when his marked hand hit the bare stone, the vision came that IT poured into him like boiling water into a glass. He saw the inside of the planet. He saw the Maw Guardian, the dragon, the ancient fire creature, coiled in its deepest chamber, wrapped around something dark. The dark thing was enormous, shapeless, alive. It looked like a wound in the world itself, a patch of absolute nothing that consumed heat and light and life. The Guardian had been holding it still for centuries, coiled around it like a living chain. But the Guardian was dying. Its fire was almost gone. Its coils were loosening, and the dark thing was pushing outward, pressing against the weakening grip, stretching toward the surface. Danny saw the connection with horrible clarity. Every tremor was the dark thing thrashing. Every crack in the ground was it trying to break free. And the mark on his arm was not a gift. It was not a blessing or a sign of destiny that IT was a job offer. The Guardian had not chosen Danny because he was special. It had chosen him because he was there and because he had done something that the dying creature recognized. He had held on to someone in the dark, in the heat, when letting go would have been easier. The Guardian had been doing the same thing for 600 years. It needed someone to take over. Danny pulled his hand off the ground and sat in the dark, breathing hard. His arm was glowing brighter than it ever had, the scale pattern pulsing in time with the tremors below. Fossick appeared beside him, his compound eyes reflecting the golden light. For the first time, the diplomat looked unsettled. "What did you see?" Fossick asked. Danny looked at him. "Something is down there. Something bad. And the only thing holding it back is running out of time." Fossick was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very carefully, "And the mark?" Danny held up his glowing arm. The light pulsed steadily, pointing downward like a compass needle aimed at the heart of the planet. "It is not a reward," Danny said. "It is a leash, and is pulling me down." In the shelter behind them, Pelly woke up crying. Danny closed his eyes. The fire inside the planet called to the fire inside his skin, and both of them burned. Danny packed his bag in silence. IT did not take long. He had never owned much. A few changes of clothes, his work gloves, his cargo loader certification card, and a photograph of a dog he used to have back on Earth. Everything fit into a single duffel. He zipped it shut, slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward the shuttle pad. He had made his decision sometime around 3 in the morning, lying on his cot with his glowing arm tucked under a blanket like he could hide it from the universe. He was not a hero. He was not chosen. He was a man with burned hands and a bad knee who moved boxes for a living, and whatever ancient cosmic duty that dying dragon wanted to hand off, it would have to find someone better. The shuttle pad was quiet. One transport was scheduled to leave at dawn, carrying the last group of non-essential personnel back to the convoy mothership. Danny's name was not on the manifest, but he knew the pilot. He could talk his way on. He could be off this planet in an hour and back to his regular life in a week. That he was halfway across the pad when he heard the footsteps behind him. Small, quick, uneven because her legs were short and the ground was rough. Danny stopped walking. Pelly came around his side and stood in front of him. She was wearing a sleeping wrap that was too big for her. Her scales were dark bronze in the pre-dawn light. She looked up at him with those amber eyes, and she did not cry. She did not make a sound. She just took his hand, his left hand, the marked one. Her small claws wrapped around his fingers, and the golden light from his skin reflected off her scales, making her glow too. "Don," she said. Her voice was steady and small and completely certain. "You jumped before. Why not now?" Danny stood very still. The shuttle engine hummed behind him. The duffel bag hung from his shoulder. His marked arm was warm in the grip of a child who weighed less than his boots. He did not have an answer for her. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came, because every answer he could give, "I am scared, I am not strong enough, I am nobody," sounded exactly like the kind of thing a person says right before they do the thing anyway. Pelly held his hand and waited. The tremor that hit at dawn was the worst one yet. It came from directly below the northern shelf, a vertical shockwave that threw people off their feet and split the ground in 3 places. 2 shelters collapsed. A section of the pad cracked apart, and a supply shuttle tipped sideways into the gap. Danny heard screaming. He heard the deep grinding of stone breaking. And beneath it all, he heard something else, a low, agonized sound rising from a maw, like something enormous was in pain. 3 Serati workers were killed when a wall fell on them. Danny saw their bodies carried past on stretchers, covered in dust, their wings bent at wrong angles. Pelly buried her face in Danny's leg and shook. The dark thing was pushing harder. The Guardian was failing faster. And every minute Danny stood on the surface was a minute the chain holding the darkness weakened further. That he looked at the dead. He looked at Pelly. He looked at his glowing arm, still held in her tiny grip. Then he dropped his duffel bag on the ground. That he walked to the edge of the maw, the main fissure, the deepest crack, the one that breathed heat and light from the planet's core. He told no one. He did not give a speech. He did not leave a message. He simply walked to the edge and looked down. The heat washed over him, and his mark blazed in response. Every line on his arm lit up like a road map, pointing down, pulling him toward the fire below. He could feel the Guardian now, faint and fading, its ancient presence pressing against his mind with something that felt like desperate hope. Danny started climbing down. The rock was hot enough to blister skin, but his marked arm did not burn. Where his left hand touched stone, the surface cooled just enough to hold. He moved slowly, carefully, one handhold at a time, descending into the throat of the planet. The light from above faded. The light from below grew. His mark became his lantern, casting golden red patterns on the tunnel walls as he went deeper. The air was thick and tasted like metal and ash. Normal lungs should have failed. Danny's chest burned, but he kept breathing. He climbed for what felt like hours. Down through tunnels of crystallized magma, past chambers where the walls glowed orange and the heat made the air shimmer like water. Down past the point where any rescue could reach him. Down past the point of return, and then the tunnel opened, and he saw it down a cavern the size of a city. Walls of molten glass reflecting a light that was not fire, but something older. And in the center, coiled around itself like a dying sun, was the Guardian.it was a dragon. That was the only word Danny's mind could find for it. A creature the size of a cathedral, scaled in gold and red and white, with wings folded tight against a body that had once burned bright enough to light the planet's core. Now its fire was dim. Its scales were cracked. Black tendrils of the parasite creature wrapped around its body like vines choking a tree, pulsing and squeezing, feeding on the last of its heat. The dragon opened one eye. It was the size of Danny's entire body. It looked at him, and Danny felt its exhaustion like a physical weight settling on his shoulders. He knelt on the glass floor. He thought of Pelly's hand in his. He thought of 11 minutes over a furnace. He thought of all the ways a person can say no and all the reasons why, and how none of them matter when someone is dying in front of you. I already burned once, Danny said. Do it. The dragon breathed, and Danny's world ended. There was no gentle transfer, no slow build. The Guardian opened its jaws and released every remaining spark of fire it had held for 6 centuries, and it poured all of it into the human kneeling before it. The breath hit Danny's chest like a wall of molten light, and he stopped being Danny Harlo for a while. He felt his bones vibrate. He felt his blood turn hot, then hotter, then hot enough that it should have boiled but somehow kept moving. The mark on his left arm exploded outward. The golden red lines raced across his chest, his ribs, his spine, his right arm, his neck. They crawled across his body like living things, etching themselves into every inch of skin, and each new line brought a pain so sharp it went past agony into something that had no name. Danny screamed. The cavern screamed with him, the glass walls ringing like a struck bell. The dragon's eye dimmed as it released the last of its fire, and its massive body sagged, and the golden light that had burned in its scales for 1,000 years went dark. The Guardian died. It died with its eye on Danny, and the last thing it sent through their connection was not a command or a prayer. It was relief. Pure, exhausted, bottomless relief. Someone had finally come. Danny knelt in the dark. His body glowed. Every line on his skin pulsed with light, turning him into a living map of fire. His eyes burned gold. When he exhaled, the air shimmered and rippled. He was not a dragon. He was still human, still flesh and bone and blood. But he was carrying a fire that was never meant for human flesh, and his body was doing something impossible that IT was adapting. Not comfortably, not cleanly. His muscles ached as if they were being rewoven. His heartbeat had doubled, then tripled, then settled into a new rhythm that was faster and deeper than any human heart should manage. His senses had expanded so violently that for several minutes he could not tell the difference between sight and sound and heat. Everything was input. Everything was data. Everything was fire. Then the dark thing attacked. That IT came from behind the Guardian's body, uncoiling from the spaces where the dead dragon's grip had loosened. It was vast. It had no shape, no edges, no surface. It was an absence, a living, hungry nothing that swallowed light and heat and turned them into more of itself. It had been feeding on the planet's core for millennia, and it was starving, and the new fire burning inside Danny was the brightest meal it had tasted in centuries. IT hit Danny like a wave of cold, so absolute it burned. Black tendrils wrapped around his legs, his arms, his chest. Wherever they touched, his fire dimmed. He could feel the heat being pulled from his body, sucked out through his skin, devoured. Danny fought. He did not know how to fight a creature made of nothing. He had no weapons, no training, no plan. But he had something the Guardian had not possessed. A human body built on a death world, evolved through 4 billion years of surviving things that should have killed it. His cells did not surrender to the cold. They responded. His metabolism spiked. His body temperature climbed. For every degree the darkness stole, Danny's flesh generated 2 more. He grabbed the tendrils with his burning hands and pulled. The darkness recoiled, not from the fire. It had eaten fire for centuries. It recoiled from the grip, from the stubbornness, from the simple, animal refusal to open his hands and let go. On the surface, the Serati watched the ground split open. But instead of magma, golden light poured from the cracks. It painted the clouds amber. It turned the dust into glitter. Pelly stood at the edge of a fissure, looking straight down into the glow, and she whispered his name. Below, Danny was losing. The darkness was too large, too old, too hungry. It wrapped around him completely, a cocoon of nothing, and his fire was shrinking. He could feel his body cooling. His heart was slowing. The golden lines on his skin were fading one by one, like stars going out. In the last moment, when the fire was almost gone, Danny did something the Guardian had never tried. He stopped fighting. He stopped pushing the darkness away. Instead, he pulled it closer. He wrapped his arms around the thickest tendril and hugged it against his chest, the way he had held Pelly over the abyss. He opened himself to the cold and the nothing and the hunger, and he let it pour into him. His body screamed. Every cell protested. The darkness flooded through his veins like ice water, mixing with the fire, clashing, tearing, breaking things that could not be fixed. And then his body did what human bodies do. IT adapted. The fire and the darkness met inside Danny's chest, and instead of destroying each other, they merged. His body became the bridge, the living furnace that could hold both, burning one as fuel for the other, cycling heat and cold in an endless loop that fed itself. The parasite, for the first time in its ancient life, found something it could not consume. Not because Danny was stronger, because he was flexible, because human biology was built on the fundamental principle that anything that does not kill you becomes part of you. The darkness screamed. It was a sound that shook the planet's core, a vibration felt on the surface as a final, massive tremor that cracked the sky with golden light. Danny held on. His arms tightened. His heart found its new rhythm, fire and shadow, beating together, one pulse, and far above, the cracks in the ground began to close. He came out of the ground at dawn, and he did not look the same. The fissure that had been breathing fire for days went quiet just before sunrise. The tremors stopped. The orange glow beneath the clouds faded to something softer, something golden and warm, like sunlight filtered through honey. The Sarati, who had been huddled in shelters all night, stepped outside and looked toward the maw. Danny climbed out slowly, one hand over the other, pulling himself up from the deep the way he had pulled himself down, carefully, without hurry, like a man who had learned that the hard part was already behind him, that he was changed. His eyes carried a permanent golden glow, faint but constant, like embers that would never fully cool. The marks covered his entire body now. Arms, chest, back, neck, lines of gold and deep red that shifted with his heartbeat like living things drawn under his skin. His body radiated warmth, not burning heat, gentle warmth, the kind that makes cold hands feel better, the kind that small creatures move toward without thinking. He reached the surface and stood in the morning light, swaying slightly. He was exhausted. He was scarred in ways that would never fully heal. His body was still adjusting to the two forces living inside it, the fire of the Guardian and the bound darkness of the parasite, spinning together in his chest like a wheel that would turn for the rest of his life. That he was not invincible. He was not a god. He was Danny Harlo, and his hands still hurt. Pelly reached him first. She had been sitting at the edge of the fissure all night, refusing to move, her small claws dug into the stone. When Danny appeared, she launched herself at him so fast that Davri could not catch her. She hit Danny's chest with her full weight, which was barely anything at all, and wrapped her arms and tail around him and pressed her ear to his heart. She heard two rhythms, one fast and human, one slow and deep, like the pulse of a sleeping planet. She did not understand what they meant, but she knew they both belonged to her Dawn, and that was enough. Danny held her. He stood at the edge of the sealed maw, with a 4-year-old alien girl clinging to him, and he closed his eyes and breathed, and the air around them shimmered gold. Fossick filed his report to the Galactic Council that afternoon. It took him 6 drafts. He kept deleting sections because they sounded too emotional for a diplomatic assessment, and a Drenari diplomat had no business sounding emotional about anything. The final version read, in part, the human designated Danny Harlo did not seek the power he now carries. He did not negotiate terms, demand compensation, or request authority. He descended into a lethal environment to confront a planetary-scale threat, because a child he had known for 3 days was in danger, and because the ground was shaking. The fire of the Maw Guardian did not make him extraordinary. By all evidence, it selected him because it recognized he already was. Fossick signed a report and stared at it for a long time before sending it. Then he deleted 3 paragraphs he had written about his personal observations, because they contained the sentence, "I have served the Council for 40 years, and I have never been more wrong about anyone." And that was not the kind of thing that belonged in an official document. The Sarati did not leave their world. The tremors had stopped. The Maw was sealed. Its destructive cycles ended for the first time in recorded history. The dark thing that had been killing their planet from the inside was bound, not by chains or cages, but by the body of a human who had taken it into himself and refused to let it win. They built a new settlement around the sealed maw. Not a colony this time. A home. Danny stayed. Not as a ruler or a general or a religious figure. As a protector. He went back to carrying heavy things. Supplies. Building materials. Equipment. The things were just bigger now. And sometimes his hands glowed while he worked, and sometimes Sarati children gathered around him because he was warm and he never told them to go away. Davri asked him once, months later, when the settlement had walls and roofs and something that almost looked like a future. She waited until Pelly was asleep. The girl still refused to sleep anywhere that was not within arm's reach of Danny, and she asked the question that had been sitting inside her since the first day. Why did you jump? That first time. No mark. No fire. No destiny. Just you and a falling child. Why? Danny was sitting on the ground outside their shelter, watching the stars. His marked arms rested on his knees, glowing faintly in the dark. He thought about the question for a moment. She was scared, he said. I was closer. Davri stared at him. Then she laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that she quickly covered with her hand. That is the most human answer I have ever heard. Danny shrugged. It is the only honest one. Across the galaxy, in the research halls and military academies and quiet offices where species were studied and classified, a new file was opened. It was not placed under Death World Physiology or Anomalous Genetic Adaptation or Tactical Threat Assessment. It was filed under a category that most xenobiologists had considered purely theoretical until a cargo loader on a dying planet proved them wrong. The category was called Voluntary Self-Sacrifice, Reflexive. The file contained a single note from the researcher who reviewed the footage of Danny Harlo jumping into the maw. For a child, he did not know. They do not decide to jump. They simply cannot decide not to.